Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. A hush fell over the audience as the first notes of music drifted through the air. From behind the velvet curtain, a figure emerged, tall, graceful, and unmistakably feminine. Long legs encased in fishnet stockings strode purposefully across the stage, hips swaying in perfect time with the sultry jazz melody. As the performer reached center stage, Peter felt his heart pounding beneath the corset cinched tightly around his waist. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it, the moment of truth. After 6 long years away from the stage, he was back in the spotlight. Only this time, he wasn't playing himself. "Welcome, darlings, to our little Halloween soiree," Peter purred into the microphone, his voice pitched higher than usual but still carrying a hint of ambiguity. "We have quite the treat in store for you tonight." From the wings, Emily watched with wide eyes as Peter commanded the stage. When he'd first approached her about filling in for the injured Lila, she'd been skeptical. But as she observed his easy confidence and fluid movements, Emily had to admit, Peter made one hell of a woman. The audience leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the statuesque beauty before them. Peter felt their eyes roving over his body, taking in the sparkling sequined dress that hugged his curves in all the right places. The padding Emily had carefully applied gave him the illusion of a feminine figure, while expert contouring disguised his Adam's apple and softened the angles of his face. As Peter launched into the opening number, his rich voice soaring over the music, a thrill ran through him. This felt right, natural even. The nerves that had plagued him backstage melted away as muscle memory took over. His body moved instinctively through the choreography he'd drilled countless times during rehearsals. In the front row, a group of regular patrons exchanged confused glances. "Is that?" one woman whispered to her companion. The man shook his head, brow furrowed. "Can't be. Look at those legs." Peter caught snippets of their conversation and had to suppress a smile. If only they knew. As the song reached its crescendo, Peter executed a flawless pirouette, his skirt flaring out around him. The audience burst into applause as he struck a dramatic final pose, chest heaving from exertion. "Thank you, darlings," Peter cooed, blowing a kiss to the crowd. "We're just getting started." He sashayed off stage as the lights dimmed, making way for the next act. In the wings, the rest of the cast gathered around him, showering him with praise. "That was incredible," gushed Margot, one of the younger dancers. "I had no idea you could move like that in heels." Peter winked at her. "Practice makes perfect, sweetie." Emily appeared at his elbow, armed with powder and lipstick for touch-ups. As she dabbed at his face, she murmured, "You're a natural up there. If I didn't know better, I'd swear you'd done this before." Peter's eyes met hers in the mirror, a silent understanding passing between them. Emily raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more as she finished her work. The rest of the first act flew by in a blur of sequins, feathers, and applause. Peter wove seamlessly in and out of the ensemble numbers, his grace and poise indistinguishable from the female performers. During one particularly risque burlesque number, he even managed to pull focus from Veronica, the troupe's usual headliner, much to her chagrin. As the curtain fell for intermission, Peter retreated to his dressing room, desperate for a moment of solitude. He sank into the chair before his vanity, studying his reflection in the mirror. The face that stared back at him was both familiar and foreign, his own features softened and enhanced by Emily's expert hand. A knock at the door startled him from his reverie. "5 minutes to places," called the stage manager. Peter took a deep breath, steeling himself for the second act. As he rose to leave, his gaze fell upon a framed photo on the vanity, himself 6 years younger, grinning broadly after his final performance, before retiring from the stage. He'd sworn then that he was done with performing, content to manage the troupe from behind the scenes. Yet here he was, about to go back out there and bare his soul, among other things, to a packed house, and loving every minute of it. The theater hummed with excited chatter as the audience returned to their seats for Act Two. Snippets of conversation drifted backstage. "Who is she? I've never seen her perform before." "Must be new. Did you see those legs?" "There's something familiar about her, though. I can't quite put my finger on it." Peter smirked to himself as he adjusted his wig one final time. If only they knew indeed. The opening strains of music signaled the start of the second act. Peter took his place in the wings, pulse quickening with anticipation. As the curtain rose, he strode on stage, hips swaying provocatively. "Welcome back, my lovelies," he purred into the microphone. "I do hope you're ready for more." What followed was a tour de force performance that left the audience breathless. Peter threw himself into each number with reckless abandon, pushing his body to its limits. He shimmied and high-kicked his way through a sultry cabaret medley, then pivoted seamlessly into a heart-wrenching torch song that left more than a few audience members misty-eyed. For the grand finale, Peter found himself center stage once more, bathed in the glow of a single spotlight. As the opening notes of "Maybe This Time" filled the air, he closed his eyes, losing himself in the music. The raw emotion in his voice sent chills through the crowd. Peter poured every ounce of longing, hope, and vulnerability into the lyrics. For a moment, he wasn't playing a character. He was bearing his own soul, channeling years of pent-up feelings into the performance. As the final note faded away, silence reigned. Then, like a dam bursting, thunderous applause erupted from the audience. They leapt to their feet, cheering and whistling as Peter basked in the glow of a standing ovation. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes as he gazed out at the sea of smiling faces. This was what he'd been missing all these years. The rush of adrenaline, the connection with the audience, the sheer joy of losing himself in a performance. As the rest of the cast joined him on stage for final bows, Peter felt a sense of belonging wash over him. These were his people, his family, and he was home. The curtain fell for the last time, and the spell was broken. Backstage erupted into chaos as performers congratulated each other and began the process of decostuming. Peter found himself swept up in a whirlwind of hugs and praise from his castmates. "You were amazing out there. I had no idea you could sing like that. Where have you been hiding those moves all this time?" Peter laughed, deflecting their questions with practiced ease. "A magician never reveals his secrets, darlings." He made his way back to his dressing room, eager to shed the costume and return to his usual self. As he reached for the door handle, a voice behind him made him freeze. "Peter, is that really you?" He turned slowly, coming face to face with Veronica. The statuesque blonde regarded him with a mixture of shock and grudging admiration. "I have to hand it to you," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I never would have guessed it was you up there if I hadn't recognized that little hip wiggle you do. It's the same one you always used to tease us about during rehearsals." Peter's shoulders sagged in relief. If anyone was going to figure it out, he was glad it was Veronica. Despite their occasional clashes, she was one of his oldest friends in the business. "Guilty as charged," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Though I'd appreciate if you kept this little revelation to yourself for now. I'm not quite ready for the big reveal just yet." Veronica mimed, zipping her lips. "Your secret's safe with me, boss. But I expect a full explanation over drinks later." As she sashayed away, Peter couldn't help but chuckle. He had a feeling that explanation was going to require more than a few cocktails. Inside his dressing room, Peter began the painstaking process of removing his costume and makeup. As he wiped away the last traces of eyeliner, he studied his reflection in the mirror. The face staring back at him was his own once more. Older and perhaps a bit wiser than the fresh-faced ingenue who'd graced that stage 6 years ago. A knock at the door interrupted his musings. "Come in," he called, expecting to see Emily or one of the other performers. Instead, a distinguished older gentleman entered, looking slightly ill at ease among the chaos of the dressing room. "Mr. Holloway," Peter said, rising to greet him.
"This is certainly a surprise. I don't usually see the theater owner backstage after a performance."
Thomas Holloway clasped Peter's hand warmly.
"Well, this wasn't exactly a usual performance, was it? I have to say, Peter, you had us all fooled. If I hadn't insisted on coming back here to meet our mysterious new star, I might never have known it was you up there."
Peter felt a flush creep up his neck.
"Ah, yes. Well, it was meant to be a bit of Halloween fun. Filling in for poor Lila at the last minute and all that."
Holloway's eyes twinkled with amusement.
"Oh, I think it was a bit more than that. I've been in this business a long time, my boy. That kind of performance doesn't come from a last-minute substitution. You've done this before, haven't you?"
Caught out, Peter could only nod sheepishly.
"Well then," Holloway continued, "I think it's high time we discussed expanding your role in the company."
"That is, if you're interested in getting back on stage more permanently?" Peter's heart leapt at the prospect. Could he really have it all, managing the troupe and performing again?
I'd be honored, sir,"
he managed to stammer out. Holloway clapped him on the shoulder.
"Excellent. We'll iron out the details next week. For now, go celebrate with your cast. You've certainly earned it."
As the door closed behind Holloway, Peter sank back into his chair, head spinning. In the span of a single evening, his entire world had shifted on its axis. He'd rediscovered his passion for performing, stunned his colleagues and audience alike, and potentially launched an entirely new phase of his career. And it had all started with a silly Halloween costume. A knock at the door roused Peter from his thoughts. Emily poked her head in, grinning from ear to ear. "There's quite the crowd waiting to meet our mysterious new starlet," she said. "Think you're up for one last performance tonight?" Peter glanced at his reflection in the mirror. With a mischievous smirk, he reached for the wig he'd so recently discarded. "Well," he said, settling the long tresses back into place, "the show must go on after all." As he followed Emily out into the bustling corridor, Peter felt a sense of excitement bubbling up within him. The roar of applause still echoed in Peter's ears as he made his way through the crowded lobby, Emily at his side. He'd donned the wig and touched up his makeup, but foregone the padding and gown in favor of a slinky cocktail dress that showed off his natural figure. The effect was striking, feminine enough to pass at first glance, but with an unmistakable edge of androgyny that left onlookers intrigued. "There she is!" came an excited cry from the throng of admirers. "The star of the show!" Peter plastered on his most dazzling smile as he was engulfed by a sea of well-wishers. Hands reached out to pat his shoulder or clasp his own, voices overlapping in a cacophony of praise. "Absolutely brilliant performance, darling. I've never seen anything like it. You simply must tell us where you trained." With practiced ease, Peter deflected their questions and basked in the adoration. He'd forgotten how intoxicating this feeling could be. The electric thrill of a truly appreciative audience. "You're too kind, really," he demurred, pitching his voice into a sultry contralto. "I'm just happy you enjoyed the show." From the corner of his eye, Peter caught sight of Veronica holding court with her own cluster of fans. She met his gaze and raised an eyebrow, the ghost of a smirk playing at her lips. He winked back, silently acknowledging their shared secret. As the crowd began to thin, a familiar face pushed to the forefront. Peter's breath caught in his throat as he recognized David Chen, the influential theater critic whose reviews could make or break a production. "I must say, my dear, you've given me quite the conundrum," Chen said, adjusting his horn-rimmed glasses. "I pride myself on keeping ahead of all the up-and-coming talent in this city, yet somehow you've managed to slip under my radar entirely. Where on earth have you been hiding?" Peter's mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation. Before he could formulate a response, Emily swooped in to his rescue. "Oh, our little songbird has been perfecting her craft overseas," she said smoothly. "We were lucky enough to snag her for this limited engagement while she's in town visiting family." Chen's eyes lit up with interest. "Is that so? Well, I do hope we'll be seeing more of you on our stages. Talent like yours is a rare find indeed." As the critic moved on to interrogate other cast members, Peter shot Emily a grateful look. She merely winked and mouthed, "You owe me," before disappearing back into the crowd. The meet and greet seemed to stretch on for hours, but eventually the last of the audience members trickled out into the night. Peter sagged against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "I'd forgotten how draining this part could be," he muttered. "The price of fame, darling," Veronica drawled, sidling up beside him. "Now I believe you promised me drinks and an explanation." Peter chuckled wearily. "That I did. Let me just change out of this getup and I'll meet you at O'Malley's in 20. Back in his dressing room, Peter stripped away the last vestiges of his feminine persona. As he scrubbed the makeup from his face, he couldn't help but wonder, was he removing a mask or revealing one? The thought lingered as he made his way to the cozy pub a few blocks from the theater. He found Veronica already ensconced in a corner booth, 2 generous glasses of whiskey waiting on the table. "All right, spill," she demanded as soon as he slid into the seat across from her. "How long have you been moonlighting as a drag queen without any of us knowing?" Peter took a fortifying sip of his drink before launching into the tale. He told her about his early days in community theater, where budget constraints often meant taking on roles regardless of gender. How he'd discovered a natural talent for female impersonation and began incorporating it into his performances. "It was just a lark at first," he explained. "A way to challenge myself and keep things interesting. But the more I did it, the more I realized how liberating it could be. On stage, in that persona, I could express parts of myself I'd always kept hidden." Veronica listened intently, her expression softening as Peter opened up about the internal struggle that had led to his retirement from performing. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of being pigeonholed, of not being taken seriously as a performer or a manager if people knew. So I walked away from the stage entirely." "And now?" Veronica prompted gently. Peter's eyes gleamed with newfound determination. "Now, I think it's time to stop hiding. Holloway offered me a chance to perform regularly again, and I intend to take it, as myself, in all my gender-bending glory." Veronica raised her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings and being unapologetically yourself. It's about damn time, Peter." As their glasses clinked together, Peter felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road ahead might be challenging, but for the first time in years, he was excited to see where it would lead. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. News of Peter's triumphant return to the stage spread like wildfire through the theater community. Holloway wasted no time in capitalizing on the buzz, announcing a special limited engagement featuring Peter as the headliner. Rehearsals were grueling but exhilarating. Peter threw himself into crafting a show that would showcase all facets of his talent, both male and female personas, songs that spanned genres and eras, and choreography that pushed the boundaries of gender expression. The rest of the company rallied around him, offering support and encouragement. Even Veronica, who had initially bristled at the thought of sharing top billing, found herself caught up in the excitement. "Just don't get used to it," she warned Peter playfully during a break. "I expect my spotlight back once this run is over." Peter merely laughed and pulled her into an impromptu waltz around the rehearsal space. "My dear, there's plenty of stage for both of us." On opening night, the energy backstage was electric. Peter paced in his dressing room, alternating between states of giddy anticipation and nerve-wracking doubt. A gentle knock at the door pulled him from his spiraling thoughts. "You about ready, boss?" Emily asked, poking her head in. "Curtains in 10. Peter took a deep breath, surveying his reflection one last time. He'd opted to begin the show as himself, suit, tie, and all, before transforming into his feminine alter ego midway through the first act. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied, straightening his jacket. As he made his way to the wings, members of the cast and crew offered words of encouragement and supportive touches. Peter felt buoyed by their faith in him, even as butterflies danced in his stomach. The house lights dimmed and a hush fell over the audience. Peter closed his eyes, centering himself in that moment of anticipation where anything was possible.
"Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcement over the speakers, "please welcome to the stage the incomparable Peter Sullivan."
Heart-pounding, Peter stepped into the spotlight. As the first notes of music swelled around him, a sense of calm washed over him. This was where he belonged. "Good evening, darlings," he purred into the microphone, a coy smile playing at his lips. "Shall we blur some lines together?" The audience erupted in cheers, and Peter launched into his opening number. As he sang and danced across the stage, he felt truly alive for the first time in years. Every movement, every note was an act of joyful defiance, a declaration of his right to exist beyond the confines of rigid gender norms. When the final curtain fell hours later, Peter was drenched in sweat and riding high on adrenaline. The standing ovation seemed to go on forever, the audience stamping and cheering long after he'd taken his final bow. Backstage was pandemonium, cast and crew swept up in the euphoria of a truly spectacular opening night. Peter found himself passed from embrace to embrace, showered with praise and congratulations. "You did it, boss," Emily said, her eyes shining with pride as she hugged him fiercely. "You showed them all who you really are." Peter's heart swelled with gratitude for his found family, the people who had supported him through this journey of self-discovery and acceptance. As he looked around at their beaming faces, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with this incredible team by his side. Later that night, long after the last champagne toast had been drunk and the theater had emptied, Peter found himself alone on the darkened stage. He stood in the ghost light's soft glow, reflecting on the twists and turns that had led him to this moment. 6 years ago, he'd walked away from performing, convinced it was the only way to protect himself from judgment and ridicule. Now he'd returned in spectacular fashion, bearing his soul and embracing every facet of his identity. As he turned to leave, Peter caught sight of his reflection in a nearby mirror. The face that looked back at him was neither wholly masculine nor feminine, but something beautifully, uniquely in between. For the first time in his life, he felt truly comfortable in his own skin. With a satisfied smile, Peter flicked off the ghost light and made his way out of the theater. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and triumphs, but for now, he was content in the knowledge that he had finally found the courage to be his authentic self, both on stage and off. The stage door clicked shut behind him, and Peter stepped out into the cool night air. The marquee above still blazed with his name, a beacon of possibility in the darkness. As he walked home through the quiet streets, Peter found himself humming a familiar tune. Maybe this time I'll be lucky. And for once, he truly believed it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.